Move. That was all he said. One word, low as a current running beneath still water, and the entire east corridor of velvet and ruin cleared like fog burning off a morning river. Mira heard it from the service alcove where she was restocking the bourbon shelf, her back to the room, her body tucked as close to the mahogany cabinet as her width would allow. She had learned in 11 months of working here that the alcove was her friend. The alcove did not judge the way her uniform stretched across her hips. The alcove did not require her to walk through the main floor under 60 pairs of eyes. She kept her back turned and her hands busy, and she listened to the sound of expensive shoes crossing expensive marble, and she told herself, as she always did, that invisibility was a kind of protection. She was wrong about that, but she did not know it yet. The bourbon bottle she was holding was a 30-year Pappy Van Winkle, the kind of thing that cost more than her monthly rent, and she set it on the shelf with both hands and a level of concentration that had nothing to do with the alcohol, and everything to do with keeping herself very still. Magnus Voss had entered the building. She could tell not by sight but by sensation. The room's atmosphere contracted the way it did before a lightning strike, all the electrons in the air drawing themselves toward a single point. The other staff felt it too. She heard the hostess stop mid-sentence. She heard the bartender's shaker go quiet. Mira did not turn around. She counted the shelf slots, matched bottles to placard, ran the inventory in her head the way she always did when she needed to be somewhere other than her body. She was good at that. Being somewhere other than her body had been her primary survival skill since she was 14 years old, and a boy in gym class had looked at her and said, loudly enough for the bleachers to hear, that she needed 2 seats. She was not 14 anymore. She was 28. She had a master's degree in forensic accounting that she used to count someone else's liquor. She had a body that she had spent 14 years learning not to see. The bourbon was aligned. The shelf was done. There was no more reason to keep her back turned. She turned around. Magnus Voss was standing 12 feet away, looking directly at her, and Mira felt the specific cold terror of a person who has been caught doing something she did not know was visible. He was exactly what the other servers whispered about in the break room, and the whispers, for once, had not exaggerated. 6'4" in bespoke charcoal, shoulders that belonged in an architectural drawing, dark hair swept back with the kind of carelessness that costs money, and eyes, she catalogued them in the half-second before she looked away, the color of obsidian at the bottom of a river, still, watchful, the kind of eyes that filed things away and never threw them out. He was not looking at her the way men at this club usually looked at her, which was not at all. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something that has just moved unexpectedly in a room where nothing was supposed to move. Mira tucked the inventory clipboard under her arm, lowered her chin, and made herself small in all the ways she had practiced, and she walked back toward the service corridor as if she were part of the floor plan. She heard his voice behind her, even over the ambient jazz, even over the restart of every conversation his arrival had paused. She did not catch the words, but she heard the direction, and her skin, from the nape of her neck to the base of her spine, went warm in a way that had nothing to do with the climate of the room. She filed it away in the same place she filed everything she could not afford to look at directly. She told herself she had imagined it. She had not imagined it. The dinner service on Friday was always cruel, not the work itself. Mira could carry a full tray through a crowded room without disturbing a single glass, could memorize a table of 8's modifications without writing them down, could calculate the check for 12 people in her head faster than the POS system. The work was fine. The work was the part she controlled. It was the other moving pieces of a Friday at Velvet and Ruin that wore her down to something thin and frayed by 11 o'clock. Like Delia Marchetti, who had worked the VIP section for 3 years, and who walked through the club as though the floor had been laid specifically for her feet. Delia was narrow in every direction. Narrow shoulders, narrow hips. The particular thinness that a certain kind of woman wielded the way other people carried knives. She wore her uniform like it had been sewn onto her body in that exact moment. And she had a way of looking at Mira, specifically at Mira's midsection, that was less a glance and more an appraisal of something that had exceeded its allocated space. Tonight, Delia had been assigned to shadow Mira through the main floor rotation, because Mira knew the tables and Delia was moving up to permanent floor staff. Velvet and Ruin's legitimate restaurant operation required this kind of pairing occasionally. Mira understood the irony without needing to voice it. She was the one doing the teaching, and she was the one in the shapeless black service tunic that pooled at her hips like a curtain someone had given up on hemming. "You don't have to walk so fast," Delia said, falling into step behind her. "They're not going anywhere. Table 6 has been waiting 22 minutes, Mira said without turning. Past 20, they start doing the math. The math. Tip math. It's a real thing." She balanced the tray on her left palm, navigated the corner by the dessert station, felt the slight resistance of the carpet against her sensible shoes. Every minute past your expected service window costs you between 2 and 4%. You actually think about this stuff. "I actually think about everything." She set the first plate down, smiled at the man in the navy suit, set the second, checked the alignment by reflex, stepped back with the tray returned to neutral position. Efficient, invisible, perfect. "It must be exhausting," Delia said, not to the table, not exactly to Mira, just into the air of the room in that way that required no audience and found one anyway. Carrying all of that around. The table did not react. The man in the navy suit was already cutting into his fillet. His companion was checking her phone, but Mira felt it, the weight of the words settling on her the way Delia had intended, sitting in the same anatomical location as every version of this comment she had received since she was old enough to understand subtext. Carrying all of that, Mira set the breadbasket down. She did not respond. She had a policy, tested over years, proven effective. Do not give it a surface to stick to. She straightened, smiled at the table, confirmed drink orders, excused herself with the quiet efficiency that had kept her employed and functional and invisible for 11 months in this specific room. She walked back to the service station. She put her hands on the counter. She breathed, and that was when she heard it. Not the words at first, just the shift. The particular hush that fell over the main floor the way it had that first night, every cell of ambient sound pulling back from a single source. She knew what it meant before she looked up and confirmed it. Magnus Voss had come down from the mezzanine. He was not supposed to be on the main floor on Friday nights. His pattern, according to the institutional knowledge passed among servers like folklore, was mezzanine on Fridays, private dining on Saturdays, office on Sundays. He had a routine, and his routine did not include the main floor at 11:15 on a Friday. And yet here he was, moving through the room with the unhurried certainty of a man who has never in his life needed to excuse himself for existing in a space. He stopped 4 feet from the service station. He was looking at the room, not at her. His second in command, a broad-shouldered man named Cale, whose name Mira knew from overheard conversations she had not meant to overhear, stood at his left shoulder and said something low and fast. Magnus listened without reacting. His profile was sharp in the warm amber light, jaw, cheekbone, the clean line of his throat above the collar of his black dress shirt. He looked like a sentence that only had one clause and did not need another. Mira looked back at her service station and began restacking napkins. "The woman at the service station," she heard Cale say, volume adjusted slightly upward, a clarification rather than a question. "She's been there since the rotation started," Magnus said. He was not talking to her. She was not even sure he knew she could hear him. I've been watching the floor map. She doesn't move like the others. Cale said something she couldn't hear. No, Magnus said. She's efficient. The others are performing efficiency. She actually has it. Mira's hands stilled on the napkin stack. She did not turn around. She picked up the napkins and began folding them into triangles with a precision that required exactly 0% of her cognitive function, which left the remaining 100% to process what she had just heard and feel the specific, confusing heat of being seen accurately by the last person she had expected to see her at all. It lasted approximately 40 seconds, which was how long it took for the moment to end, for Magnus to move toward the private hall, for Cale to follow, for the room's volume to resume its normal register. 40 seconds, and then Mira was back inside her invisibility, which was where she lived, which was where she was safe. She told herself it meant nothing. She was very good at telling herself things. Tuesday morning arrived the way bad news always did, with perfect ordinary light and the sound of the espresso machine in the staff kitchen running its first cycle, and the particular calm that existed before Mira looked at the quarterly reconciliation report and understood that someone had been stealing from Magnus Voss for 14 months. She almost didn't look. The report had been forwarded to her by Thomas in the accounts department with a message that said simply, "Can you double-check the liquor inventory variance? We're getting a weird number." Thomas was 23 and had a business degree and was perfectly competent at the straightforward mathematics of a restaurant's ledger. He was not equipped for what was actually inside this particular spreadsheet, which was why the number looked weird to Thomas and looked like a confession to Mira. She set down her coffee. She pulled the full ledger, not just the variance sheet, all of it, 4 years of it, and she went through it the way she went through everything. Systematically, without assumption, following the thread of what was actually there, rather than what should have been there. It took her 3 hours. By the time she was done, she had a number and a name and a method and a timeline, and the number was $463,000, and the method was elegant enough that she genuinely admired it, for approximately 2 seconds before the reality of what she was holding fully assembled itself. Someone on the inside had been bleeding the accounts. The liquor purchases were the visible layer, inflated invoices, fake vendors, a shell company that had been constructed with enough competence to fool a standard audit, but not enough to fool someone who knew what constructed incompetence looked like, because the shell company had a seam, a subtle one, running through the timing of the transactions. The specific calendar pattern of when invoices were submitted. Every 14 days. Always 14 days. That kind of rhythm wasn't spontaneous. That was someone who had another job, another rhythm, whose theft schedule had mapped itself onto a real-world obligation without the thief realizing it. Mira built the trace backward from the shell company, through the vendor registration, through the business license, and she found the name at the end of the thread the way she always found things, quietly, without drama, in the space between 2 columns of numbers where most people wouldn't look. The name was Benicio Ramos, Velvet and Ruin's director of purchasing. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at her phone, which sat on the desk next to her cold coffee, and she thought about the hierarchy of a problem like this, and the specific danger of holding information that belonged to someone far above her pay grade in an industry where information had consequences. She could give it to Thomas. Thomas would take it to the accounting supervisor. The accounting supervisor would take it upward. The information would arrive at Magnus Voss's desk, filtered through 4 layers of other people's understanding, any one of which could misinterpret, redact, or, and this was the version that made her chest tighten, alert the wrong person before the right one was prepared. Or she could document it completely, package it in a format that left no ambiguity, and take it directly to the person it belonged to. She thought about the service station. She thought about 40 seconds in warm amber light. She thought about all of the reasons she did not do things that put her in direct sight lines. She built the report anyway. It took another 40 minutes. When it was done, it was 17 pages, sourced and cross-referenced and annotated in the margins where she thought additional context would prevent misunderstanding. It was the most thorough forensic accounting document she had produced since her master's program, and it was sitting in a folder on her desktop with Magnus Voss's name on it, and she was going to have to walk it through a building she had spent 11 months learning to be invisible inside. She printed it. She put it in a plain manila envelope. She smoothed her tunic over her hips the way she always did, a habit without function, and she stood up. The door to Magnus Voss's office on the 3rd floor was attended by a man Mira recognized from the corridor but had never directly addressed. He was the kind of large that functioned as a statement about what lay behind the door. He looked at her the way large men at this level of operation tended to look at service staff, not with contempt exactly, but with the taxonomic blankness of someone who has organized the world into categories and needs to quickly determine which one you belong to. "I have financial documentation for Mr. Voss," Mira said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steady. "It's time sensitive. Leave it with me. I need to present it directly. There are components that require explanation." She held the envelope at her side, not offering it. "He'll want to hear those components before he decides what to do next." The man looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He had the expression of someone running a calculation that was taking longer than usual. She waited. Waiting was something she was very good at. He opened the door. The office was nothing like the club below it. Where the restaurant was amber and velvet and calculated warmth, this room was charcoal and glass, and the particular chill of a space where decisions were made without theatrical comfort. One wall was entirely windows, the city laid out below in its indifferent grid. The desk was a single slab of dark wood. No clutter, no sentimentality. 2 monitors and a leather portfolio, and a glass of water that had not been touched. Magnus Voss was standing at the window with his back to her. He had his hands clasped behind him. He was wearing black again, or still. She wasn't sure he owned other colors. The city light hit the line of his shoulders and made him look like something drawn rather than born. He did not turn around immediately. He let her walk into the center of the room. Let the door close behind her. Let the silence do the work that other men did with words. Then he turned. His eyes found her face first. Not her body, her face. She registered this with the specific attention she gave to anomalies. Then his gaze moved. Not the quick, dismissive sweep she was accustomed to, but a slow, deliberate travel that took in the full length of her before returning to her face, and his expression did not change in any way she could classify, which was itself an anomaly. "You're from the floor," he said. "Service staff, yes. My name is Mira Castile. I work the main rotation Tuesday through Saturday." She extended the envelope. "I found something in the quarterly reconciliation that needed to come directly to you." He did not take the envelope immediately. He crossed the room in the unhurried way he did everything, stopped at a distance that was closer than professional and farther than comfortable, and then he did take it, and his fingers were bare, no gloves, no rings, and the hand that closed around the envelope was large enough that the manila disappeared inside his grip. He opened it. She watched his face while he read. Most people's faces did things while they read. Micro movements of the brow, the jaw, the set of the mouth. His did almost nothing. One small tightening around his eyes, on the 3rd page, when the shell company appeared. That was all. He read all 17 pages. It took 7 minutes. She counted, the way she counted everything. 463,000, he said when he was done. His voice was exactly what she had heard from 12 feet away on a Friday night. Low, contained, a baritone that didn't work to carry itself. The room just deferred to it. $463,218, she said. Over 14 months, the shell company is registered in Delaware under a variation of his wife's maiden name. He'll have a dissolution prepared if he thinks anyone is looking. The timing pattern in the invoices suggests he's done this before and knows his own exposure window. Magnus looked at her, really looked at her, the way no one had looked at her in this building in 11 months. How long did it take you to find this? 3 hours for the identification, 40 minutes for the documentation. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite the absence of expression she'd catalogued before. It was something more deliberate, the face of a person who has encountered a fact that requires the rearrangement of prior assumptions. "You have a forensic accounting background," he said. It wasn't a question. "Master's degree, I didn't list it on my application because I needed the job." The silence that followed was the kind that had texture. "Why didn't you take this to your supervisor?" he asked. Because the supervisor would have taken it to the director of accounting, and the director of accounting plays golf every other Thursday with Benicio Ramos, and 14 days is Ramos's cycle. I wasn't willing to risk the timeline. She kept her voice flat, professional, the voice she used when she needed the content of her words to land without the distraction of emotion. "If you're going to move on this, it needs to happen before his next invoice cycle. That's 9 days. Magnus set the report on the desk. He looked at her for a long moment, unhurried, unreadable, with the particular quality of attention that felt less like being examined and more like being recorded. "Sit down, Ms. Castile," he said. "We're going to talk about what happens next." She was halfway to the chair when the door opened without a knock. Benicio Ramos was not a large man in the physical sense. He was medium in every direction, medium height, medium build, the kind of face that assembled itself from borrowed features and left no lasting impression. What he was, however, was loud in the specific register of a man who has never been told no, with enough conviction to make it stick. He had a voice that preceded him into rooms, and the voice was already mid-sentence when the door swung open, addressing Magnus with the easy familiarity of someone who had calculated his own indispensability and decided the number was very high. "Magnus, I need 5 minutes on the Q3 liquor numbers. Thomas is running some kind of—" He stopped. He had seen Mira. He had seen the envelope. He had seen, because men like him were, in certain survival-critical ways, extremely perceptive, the 17-page report fanned open on the desk. His face did the thing that guilty faces do when they understand they have walked into the end of their own story. It went through several expressions very quickly, like a screen cycling through options, before it settled on the one he had probably decided was the most defensible: offense. What is this? He was not asking Magnus. He was looking at Mira. Who authorized this? Still at Mira. This is an internal matter. Why is service staff in this office? Furniture doesn't authorize things, Mira said. The room went quiet the way rooms went quiet when something unexpected had been said. She felt it, the brief drop in atmospheric pressure that accompanies a sentence no one anticipated. Ramos blinked. "Excuse me? You looked at me when you came in and you registered me as furniture. I'm telling you I'm not." She kept her voice at the same register she'd used to explain the invoice cycle. Calm, factual, level. "I'm the person who found your shell company, traced your vendor registration, documented your invoice timing, and identified the pattern you've been running for 14 months. I'm the person who walked that documentation to the one man in this building, with both the authority and the motivation to do something about it before you reached your next cycle. I'm not furniture. I'm the reason you're out of time." She had not planned that speech. She had not planned any of it. It had arrived from some place in her that had been storing things for 14 years, waiting for a sentence structured around the right subject. She was the subject of that sentence, not the object, not the backdrop, the subject. Ramos's face reorganized itself around the architecture of a man who is cornered. He looked at Magnus. Magnus had not moved from the position he'd taken when Ramos entered. Still, measured, with the particular quality of stillness that wasn't absence but accumulation, every unspent word gathering behind his eyes. "Magnus, whatever she told you." "Out," Magnus said. "One word. I can explain the—" "Kale." Magnus had not raised his voice. He did not need to. The door behind Ramos opened with the precision of something that had been expected, and Kale's substantial frame filled it, and Ramos understood, from the geometry of the room and the expressions available to him, that his 5 minutes were up. Kale walked him out. The door closed. Magnus did not look at the door. He was looking at Mira. She was standing in the center of the charcoal office with her hands at her sides and her sensible shoes on the slate-gray carpet and her black service tunic pooled at her hips, and she was aware, acutely, suddenly, with a heat that had nothing to do with the room's actual temperature, that her heart was running at a pace inconsistent with her outward steadiness. She had just told a man twice her organizational rank that she was not furniture while standing in her employer's private office holding evidence of grand larceny. She was processing the consequences of this in real time. Magnus crossed the room. He stopped at the distance that was closer than professional. His eyes moved over her face with the same unhurried deliberateness she'd catalogued before, and then he did something she had not anticipated. He reached out with his bare hand, and he adjusted the envelope on the desk so that its edge was perfectly aligned with the desk's corner. A small, precise gesture, unnecessary. She understood, because she was good at understanding things she was not supposed to see, that it was the gesture of a man giving his hands something to do while the rest of him made a decision. "I've watched you work this floor for 11 months, he said. She said nothing. She was very good at nothing. "I knew your name 2 weeks after you started. I know you work your rotation with a precision my floor managers can't teach and can't replicate. I know you avoid the main room when there's a large gathering, and I know why." He stopped. He let the silence have its texture again. "I told Kale in October that the woman at Service Station 4 was worth more than her current function. He told me you hadn't applied for anything above your current grade. I didn't think I'd get it," she said, and then, because she had apparently decided tonight was the night she said true things, "I didn't think you'd consider it." Why? It wasn't a question. It was an invitation to the real conversation, and she understood that, and she looked at him fully for the first time, not the cataloging glance, not the careful peripheral reading, but direct and complete, and she said it. "Because women who look like me are very good at being useful, and very easy to not see. I've been here 11 months. You've spoken to me directly twice, including tonight. I know what I am in rooms like this. I know what I'm supposed to be." She paused. Her voice was still steady. She was astonished, distantly, by the steadiness. "Furniture. Part of the floor plan. Useful in the way a good chair is useful. No one asks a chair to sit down." Magnus looked at her for a long time. The city moved behind him through the glass, indifferent, glittering, continuing its business without reference to the two people standing in a charcoal room above it. Then he did the thing she had not expected, not from him, not from a man who commanded a room by standing in it. He moved to the chair across from the desk, not the chair behind the desk, the other one, the visitor's chair, and he sat down. He was a large man sitting in a chair designed for the average visitor, and his frame filled it differently than average, and he looked up at her from that position with a quality of deliberateness that made her understand he had done it on purpose. He had lowered himself to her eye level. "You're not furniture," he said. His voice had done the thing she'd been warned it did by women who had been in VIP sections long enough to hear it. Dropped below its usual register, became something less a sound than a physical presence. You are the most competent person in this building, and I have let you fold napkins in a service alcove for 11 months because you made yourself easy to overlook, and I was not paying the right kind of attention. He paused. That is a failure I intend to correct, starting now. Mira's hands at her sides were absolutely still. Her heart was not. What does that mean? She said. It means you're no longer service staff. It means I want you heading the internal audit division I've been unable to staff properly for 2 years, because I kept hiring people who could not find what you found in 3 hours. He held her gaze with the particular intensity of a man who has decided something and is in the process of making sure the other party understands the decision is final. It means I am going to need you to stop arranging yourself so that people don't see you, because I find it inconvenient. You find it inconvenient, she repeated. When something valuable is being deliberately obscured, it creates operational problems. She looked at him. He looked at her. She was quite certain they were not talking entirely about accounting. There's something else, she said. Tell me. She had not planned to say this part. She had planned to leave this office with her manila envelope and her promotion offer, and whatever structural reality was assembling itself around her in this room, and she had planned to go home and sit with it in the particular privacy of a person who processes things alone, because she has always processed things alone. But he had sat down. He had brought himself to her level. He had used the word deliberately, which meant he understood the word, which meant he had thought about this before tonight. Delia Marchetti, she said. She's moving up to permanent floor staff. She's going to do the thing she does, the thing she did tonight, at table 6, and she's going to do it to the next person who looks like me who walks through your hiring process. And that person might not have a master's degree in forensic accounting to make them worth your time. They might just be a person, and they deserve not to be furniture either. The silence was a full and considered thing. Consider it addressed, Magnus said. She believed him. That was the part she had not anticipated, that she would believe him, that it would feel obvious, that it would land with the weight of something she had not known she was waiting for. She sat down, in the good chair, across the desk from the visitor's chair where he sat. She sat down and she placed her hands in her lap, and she did not tuck herself smaller or angle away from the lamplight or fold her arms across her midsection, and it was the most present she had felt in a room, in her own body, in a very long time. Walk me through the Delaware registration again, Magnus said. I want to understand every layer before Cale brings him back in. Mira reached for the report. She began at the beginning. She spoke clearly, at full volume, taking up the sound the way she was learning, in increments, to take up space. Magnus watched her talk through 17 pages of evidence with the focused attention of a man who has recalibrated what he is paying attention to and intends to be very good at it from now on. At the 4th page, his phone buzzed. He turned it face down without looking at it. At the 9th page, she noticed that his chair had moved, slightly, almost imperceptibly, a few inches closer than it had been when she started. She noticed this, and she did not look away from the document, and she did not minimize the thought, and she did not tell herself she had imagined it. She had not imagined it. At the 17th page, she set the report on the desk between them, and Magnus's hand came to rest beside it, and his bare fingers were 3 inches from hers, and neither of them moved. The city continued behind the glass. The club continued below them. The night continued doing what nights did, which was proceed without asking permission. You said you didn't list your degree because you needed the job, Magnus said. Yes. What were you afraid of? She thought about it honestly, that it would make me more visible, that visible was dangerous, that the safest version of me was the one nobody bothered to look at. She paused. I've been managing that calculation for a long time. Magnus was quiet for a moment. Then, the calculation was wrong. I know, she said. I think I've known for a while. I didn't have a room that was worth the risk. He looked at her. He did not say anything elaborate. He did not build a sentence around it or dress it in qualification. He simply looked at her the way he had looked at the report, completely, with the full attention of someone who was going to remember every page. You have one now, he said. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who had made a decision and was not revisiting it. It had the same structure as every other thing he had said tonight, declarative, minimal, irrevocable. Mira looked at him. She felt the specific warmth of a person standing in light they have not allowed themselves to stand in before, still slightly uncertain of how to hold their arms, but standing in it. 9 days, she said, before Ramos's next cycle. 8, he said. We're using tonight. She nodded. She reached for the report. And Magnus Voss, who had run a syndicate from a charcoal room above a velvet and glass restaurant for 6 years, who had made full rooms go silent with a single word, who had never once in anyone's recollection adjusted his position for another person's comfort, moved his chair the remaining distance until the gap was gone, and leaned in to look at the document beside her, and she could smell, at that range, something cedar and cold, something exact and clean, and she made a decision of her own. She stopped making herself smaller. She let the room hold all of her, both hands on the report, shoulders back, her full weight in the chair, present and unhidden and demanding exactly as much space as she actually needed. And in the window glass, in the dark reflection that the city threw back at them, she could see the shape they made together, his dark frame, her soft abundance, 2 people leaning toward the same page, and she thought that the shape was not wrong. She thought, in fact, that the shape was something she might get used to. 3 days later, Cale escorted Benicio Ramos out of the building with a discretion that left no visible trace, and an understanding that the Delaware accounts would be fully dissolved before close of business. The golf Thursdays ended. The invoice cycle stopped. The $463,000 began a quiet, systematic journey home. Mira received a new employment contract on a Tuesday morning, delivered to the office that had been emptied and repainted for her. Charcoal, because Magnus had asked her what she liked and she had told him the truth, which was that she liked rooms that looked like decisions. The contract listed her as Director of Internal Audit. It listed her salary in a number that made her sit down. Attached was a handwritten note in a script that was angular and spare and unsentimental. Your name is on the door. Stop folding napkins. It was signed with his initial. On Wednesday, 3 boxes appeared in the office. She opened the first one and found fabric in colors she had never let herself consider. Deep emerald, midnight blue, a burgundy that was the color of something serious, tailored things with shape and intention, things that had been measured without her present, which meant someone had looked carefully enough to know. She sat with the boxes for a long time. Then she put on the emerald. It fit. Not the way her service tunic fit, not the way fabric fit when it has been chosen to hide, but the way something fits when it has been made for the body that exists, rather than the body that is supposed to apologize. She was wearing it when Magnus came to the doorway at the end of the day, filling it the way he filled everything. He looked at her. His expression did that thing again, the deliberate settling into not quite stillness, the thing she had started to read as feeling. The emerald, he said. Yes, she said. You should wear it to the board review on Friday. You want me at the board review? You're presenting the remediation findings. He paused, and she had learned, in 3 days, that his pauses were punctuation. And I want them to see you. She stood up. She walked to where he was standing in the doorway, and she stopped close enough that she could have counted the stitching on his lapel, and she looked at him directly, the way she had been practicing, and she said, "That's a change from furniture." "It is," he agreed. His voice was at its lower register. His hand, bare, uncomplicated, rose and rested against the doorframe 6 inches above her shoulder, not touching, just present. "I find I'm attached to the change." She thought about 14 years of gym class bleachers. She thought about Delia Marchetti's appraisal and the service alcove and the bourbon shelf and 30-year Pappy Van Winkle, and all the ways she had learned to make the room forget she was in it. She thought about a man sitting down on purpose, and a chair moved 3 inches at a time, and a handwritten note in angular script that said her name was on the door. She had spent a very long time learning to be invisible. She thought it might be time to try the other thing. "Friday," she said. "The Emerald, the board review." "Yes," he said. "And Magnus." She said his name in full, which she had not done before, which landed in the air between them with a weight she had intended. "Next time you know someone in your building is worth more than their function." She let it rest there for a beat, because she had learned that pauses were punctuation. Don't wait 11 months. He looked at her. She thought she saw, in the obsidian river depth of his eyes, the briefest surface of something that in any other man she might have called astonishment, and in him she classified as recalibration. "No," he said, "I won't." The city moved in the window behind him. The club moved below them. Mira Castile stood in her emerald dress in the doorway of her own office, and she let the room hold her completely, and she did not tuck herself smaller, and she did not arrange herself away from the light. She took up the space she had been given. She took up the space she had always deserved. And the man in black in the doorframe, who had never once in living memory adjusted anything about himself for another person, stayed exactly where he was, 3 inches closer than the professional distance, one hand on the doorframe above her shoulder, and the gap between them was the kind of distance that has already made its decision and is simply waiting for the moment to catch up. She smiled. It was not a service staff smile. It was not a polite, invisible, "please don't look at me" smile. It was a smile that understood its own power and was beginning, slowly and with great intention, to use it. Magnus Voss, who commanded rooms with one word and ran operations with cold precision, and had never in any documented instance been caught off guard, looked at that smile, and the city light in the window behind him did something warm to the sharp architecture of his face, and he said nothing at all, which was, she had learned, his most eloquent register. She walked back to her desk. She sat down. She opened the remediation file, and she began building the presentation that was going to make a boardroom full of people understand, in precise and irrefutable terms, exactly what they had been missing. The door remained open behind her. She did not close it. If this story reached somewhere it needed to reach, if Mira's voice was something you felt in your own chest, hit that like button and let it tell the algorithm that these stories belong here. Share it with someone who has ever been the smartest person in a room that refused to see them. Subscribe so the next chapter finds you when it drops. And leave a comment below. Have you ever had to walk into a room and prove you weren't furniture? Tell me. I'm listening.